Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The program is about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The program is about to begin. Welcome to the stage, Nikhil Goyal, Head of Product for Aviation, Uber.
Good morning. I see some of you had a late night last night. Did folks go to the celebration event? Good. Awesome. We've got another exciting day for you. Actually, 3 times as exciting because you'll spend the majority of your time in the breakout sessions. So we'll start with the future of cities. We'll start with Justin Ehrlich, our head of policy, who is hosting a series of super exciting lightning talks. We'll then break out from 10 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. In the various breakout sessions. Again, it's choose your own adventure. You should see in the agenda what's going on in the 3 rooms. We've got Garen, Amundsen, and Haas, as well as, of course, the courtyard and the model garden for in-between sessions. So please, and then we will convene back in here for Peter Diamandis and the Uber CEO fireside chat. So please join me in welcoming our head of policy, Justin Ehrlich. Justin.
Welcome to the stage, Justin Ehrlich, Head of Policy, Aviation, Uber.
Hey, welcome to day 2. I'm really excited to be here. Yesterday, we learned a ton about amazing developments in this new technology. And the progress has been immense in the last year. What I wanted to do today is put that in the context of how Uber thinks about mobility and elevates role in the broader mobility ecosystem that we're trying to push. And to do that, we'll have to think about where cities are heading and the role of cars in those cities. So we're in the century of the city right now. In 1800, 3% of people lived in cities. In 2008, that crossed 50% for the first time. And the UN predicts that by 2030, over 2/3 of the world's population will be in cities. New York became the first megacity of over 10 million in 1930, followed by Tokyo then in 1955, and Mexico as the 3rd megacity in 1975. As of today, there are now just under 50 megacities across the world. Over the next 10 years, McKinsey estimates that the top 100 cities will make up over 1/3 of global GDP, and the UN predicts that the area covered by those cities could triple. So we've got this huge growth, and the challenge is cities have not been able to accommodate this growth at its rapid pace. We don't have policies that encourage dense urban development, and so we keep expanding outward. It's very hard to build sufficient subways or commuter transit to keep up with the demand due to regulatory hurdles, political challenges, underfunded budgets, and an increase in the cost per mile of fixed-line transit. And building new roads and adding lanes is difficult and often ineffective due to induced demand, which just ends up creating the same amount of congestion. So we're left with this growth outpacing our infrastructure. And so the result is that we live in a world dominated by cars. In 2017, the National Household Travel Survey estimated that 87% of workers commute by private car. And even in cities with over 1 million people with heavy rail, that number is still at 73%. And we're left now with transportation as the highest emitting sector of over 30% of all total GHG emissions. Meanwhile, we have the availability of cars proliferating, as the cost of cars have decreased when you factor in the value of dollars over time. We've got populations growing, particularly in the international markets, with the youth bulge increasing in particular, and GDP per capita is rising as well. At the same time, we have cars sort of maintaining this aspirational goal for many people. And so the trend line of where we may be heading with the purchase of cars is a bad one. And this leads to just a basic fundamental geometry problem, which is we need to move more and more people through a very fixed and finite amount of space. And we're currently on an unsustainable path for that. And so using space efficiently is paramount. Fixing this will not be easy. The growth of cars have led to cities being designed to accommodate those cars, which creates this vicious circle. We've got big streets, we've got parking lots, and the car has become such a classic use case for basically all of our needs, whether it's a quick short hop trip, a long trip, multi-stop. It is so hard to match the mix of convenience, reliability, comfort, and price, particularly when they already own the vehicle and the marginal cost to use it is so small. So this creates also, though, an opportunity for those who haven't purchased cars, particularly in international markets, and that's where we really need to think about is what can we do now to get ahead of people buying their next car and instead thinking about switching modes. And this moment in time is so exciting in mobility because we have an interlocking of so many different revolutions at once. We've got heightened connectivity, where now the proliferation of a smartphone in someone's pocket is almost ubiquitous. We're starting to see behavioral shifts, most notable the classic millennial, but the concept that we don't need to own things all the time. We are okay using them. We're also seeing a proliferation of different types of vehicles, from dockless bikes to e-bikes, e-scooters, drones, and of course, VTOL. And finally, big step changes in technologies like autonomy and batteries. So, what do we think this future could look like? We need to set our vision for what the future of mobility looks like and then need to work to get there. So for us, we offer the following thoughts of how we think about mobility in the future. One is that it needs to be a mix of transit and multimodal solutions. Transit has to always serve the arterial routes in these high-capacity ways. It's the only way the geometry works. And then we need to complement that with rideshare. That might look like on a one-way trip using multiple modes at once, or it might be you take one mode on the way there and another mode on the way back, but it's all about flexibility. We also need to move from owning to sharing. And so that unlocks the ability to use these assets at a much higher capacity. And then we need to pool those assets as well. For any vehicle with multiple seats, we should be always looking to try and pool. That will both reduce the cost and address congestion. For electric and renewable, be it by car, bike, or aircraft, we need to deploy electric more broadly, but we also have to realize that the intensity of the grid matters too, and so we need to push for clean tech. Autonomy is vital both for safety and reducing the cost of mobility. And as we touched a bit yesterday, there's a vital importance of integrating our mobility planning and our land use planning, such as mixed-use development, moving from parking minimums to parking maximums, and rethinking our space. And finally, of course, why we're here today, 3D space, using the sky to unlock capacity. These are all important individually, but they are reinforcing. So for example, as we increase vehicle utilization through rideshare and AVs, it improves the economics of EVs. As we have autonomy decrease costs, it will increase the network density of people looking to use the service, which will make pooling better and easier. The time savings in the air will also increase people to share in the air. To realize this vision, though, we need to offer a real alternative to the car, and that is very hard, as we discussed. So that solution has to start with your phone being a one-stop mobility shop. But to do that, we have to pull together a full bundle of options so you can really compete with the car. It's very hard to compete when you have some use cases here, but you still need a car for other ways. And so that's why we're building a platform to get you from A to B, no matter your use case, no matter your trip. The goal is to reduce the friction as much as possible so you can get the right mode for the right trip, pay, and all in one go. If you think about it, kids used to be so excited when they were 16 in the US, I don't know internationally, and they would get their first license and potentially car. Now we're starting to see excitement about the phone in a way that we haven't seen before, so maybe there is this opportunity to really shift that type of thinking. So we started with UberX, of course, as you all know, and we immediately saw that customers were open to not using their car for certain types of trips, and that there was latent demand, so that became the first part of our bundle. But that was just the beginning. We now have Uber Pool, so a different type if you want a more affordable trip where you're willing to share, you can do that. For trips where you can even afford to walk a couple blocks, we have Express Pool, where you walk, you get routed on a much more efficient route, and then you walk the last bit. So it's a little bit more node to node rather than point to point, and even more affordability. We've also now recently released Uber Bike, partnering with Jump. This is to solve the short hop problem. So when you just need to go a couple miles or where there's a bunch of congestion, now you can take an e-bike. We're also looking to partner with transit, looking to integrate payment so you can basically use transit through the app as well. And for issues like a road trip or multi-stops, we're now offering Uber Rent as we continue to try and sort of tackle all the key use cases. But there's a use case that we really haven't tackled yet, and that's the unsolved problem of the long trip. Whether it's because they are long distances or because of major congestion, the car continues to dominate in this space in particular. And behavioral research has shown that people may actually be hesitant to share car rides for longer trips. So with cities growing in population and the long trip problem only getting worse, we need to really be proactive here. Now, urban transit is critical to solving this issue, but it will not be able to go everywhere. And so that's why we are looking to expand our bundle, and that's why we're looking at advanced technologies to truly change the way we move. And that turns us to 3D space. We need to compete against cars both on cost of time and on money. So autonomous vehicles will be able to reduce the cost of the trip on the ground, but we will not be able to really attack the sort of time cost savings. And the only way to do that is to look 3D, because roads are inherently two-dimensional, and they already use up super valuable real estate and are constrained. So opening up to the sky cracks this geometry problem, because you can both go horizontally and vertically. Doing this is also doing it in a smart way, because the air travel that we're imagining is capital light. So if you think about in 1993, the 105 freeway opened here in LA to serve LAX. It was planning started in the 1960s. It cost $5 billion in today's dollars for about 17.3 miles. Unlike roads, air doesn't require construction or maintenance, so it eliminates the need to build that out in that same way. And skyports can also be developed faster, part of real estate development, and can be done in a decentralized manner, sort of slowly building up, and you continue to accrete value. It also inherently integrates land use. And so that by having the skyport built in with the commercial or residential real estate. So we can change rooftops into parking, we can change the parking on the ground into parklets, and we can have a much better use of land space. And finally, it's very flexible. Cities are constantly changing. They're complex. It is tough to predict what neighborhoods will become big next. And so we can adapt very easily without having any fixed routes. It also allows us to invest in neighborhoods where we think there might be a potential for growth at a sort of lower risk, lower capital way. This increased bandwidth will have major implications. We will have longer trips. People may be willing to be induced out of their cars and share in the sky because of the time savings. And also, when you compare our model of air travel, it's always been shared. And if you look at larger commercial aviation versus this sort of vehicle type of travel, it will be much nicer. We'll unlock people's productivity lost by congestion. People who have been priced out of the city as real estate prices continue to go up will continue to have access. Mega cities, which are getting sprawling and more congested, will have connectivity. And medium-sized cities that are near each other will be able to be linked in ways that will allow them to function like much larger urban areas. Now, when we introduce new movement patterns, we must be thoughtful in the way that they are done. We're building for current trend lines, like the belief that the power grid will continue to be green, but we must keep up on focusing on that. And so we must ensure that the trend lines that we're building upon do come to fruition. Now, technology alone is not a solution for urban problems, but done right and in partnership with others, it can be game-changing. And that's why you've heard a lot about partnerships yesterday in the ecosystem, and that's why we're so excited to work closely with Dallas and LA. Our pilots help us understand how to make the service work best for cities so then we can scale globally. But being a good pilot means having enough diversity so we don't overfit or have blind spots. And so we always knew we would need at least 3 cities and that one would need to be international, particularly given that large cities in Asia, Latin America, and Africa are projected to become mega cities by 2030. So when we launched, we didn't anticipate just how much excitement would be generated from around the globe, from Dubai and Singapore, India, Japan, Brazil, and beyond. We even had a newspaper announce that we were launching in a city that we had never even considered. So we have decided that as we look forward to selecting our international Elevate city, we're going to really broaden the pool. We're putting out an open call to international cities across the world that we want to hear from you. If you are interested in having us explore a fit for an international pilot city, we want you to let us know. To help with that, we want to share a little bit about what we think makes a good pilot city. We think it's around having a clear need with a population that is very large, say 2 million and over, a very dense city that enables ride sharing, polycentric nodes of density, so we're doing connectivity. There's lots of congestion that we think Uber Air can help with. It's also enabling conditions like multimodal integration, ride share and bike share, so we can offer a full end-to-end service. There are Skyport partners, real estate partners. There is a strong electricity grid. And finally, local commitment. A community who is excited about being a first adopter, policymakers who are supportive of regulatory changes, and already showing progress in a smart city world. Just some examples of what that might look like. It could look like investing in transit, as LA has done here with Measure M. It could look like supporting new mobility solutions, encouraging pooling through congestion pricing or high occupancy vehicle lanes, investing in your EV infrastructure, or committing to do greenhouse gas reduction. So the most important thing, though, is a city who is excited to partner with us and be leaned in. There will be so many unexpected challenges as we tackle this 3D vision. And we know there will be unknown unknowns that we can never predict. So we want to work through them with committed partners who will be there to solve these together. We're not looking for tax breaks or local incentives, just identify a city with a strong vision who is investing in their future. So if you know of anyone who might be interested, or if you're a city yourself, we will be publishing all of this information at uberair.com/air. And we want to hear from you either to our local policy team or to the own Elevate team directly by July 1st. And we're really excited to start that conversation globally. With that, I want to change gears and introduce our next session, the Lightning panel session. We've talked to you a little bit about how we, Uber, think we can help cities, but there's so much opportunity. And what you'll hear from our next 6 fantastic speakers is their vision of how aviation technology, new mobility solutions will change and help cities in a variety of different ways. So with that, I'll turn it over to our next speaker to each share a 5-minute vision about what they think that world can unlock. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Head of Drones and Tomorrow's Airspace, World Economic Forum, Timothy Reuter.
Well, hello. It's great to be here with this community of inventors, entrepreneurs, policymakers, and community leaders who are literally inventing an entire new form of mobility. So just for those of you who aren't familiar with the World Economic Forum, we are the international organization for public-private cooperation, probably best known for our annual meeting in Davos, where we bring together public and private sector leaders to tackle global challenges. Recently, we opened a new center for the 4th Industrial Revolution in San Francisco to tackle the question of, given that the speed, scale, and scope of technological change is unprecedented, what are new forms of governance? What are the policies, regulations, and industry standards that are going to need to be created to ensure that these technologies maximize the social benefit and mitigate the risks? Now, I couldn't resist putting up these 2 magazine covers to just highlight how long we have all been talking about flying cars. So the cover to your left is actually from 1957, when people started working on these designs, and the one on the right is from the early 90s. And one of the interesting things that I noted is that, even back in the 50s, people could imagine flying vehicles and the sort of multi-rotor concept, but they couldn't imagine ride sharing and shared mobility. You'll notice that both of these are taking off from individuals' houses, which I think we know today is not the way that this is most likely to unfold. Now, a couple years ago, we partnered with the city of Boston to help them think about what would the impact of autonomous vehicles be on the city. And I think many of the things that we learned from that experience are actually very applicable to this new kind of aerial mobility. First, aerial mobility will be integrating with and impacted by existing mobility networks. And we've been talking a lot about cities here, but one of the interesting questions I see is perhaps what we need to do is actually be linking some non-urban areas to an urban core. Now, one of the causes of inequality in this country is that it's very difficult for people to live in low-cost areas but get access to high-wage areas. And this could be one of the solutions to that challenge. Secondly, we're going to have to think about issues of equity for this technology. Now, there's been a lot of talk about reducing the cost of access to aerial mobility, but there's a number of other important questions related to equity. Where are the skyports going to be located? What communities are they going to serve? Might cities want to make sure that skyports are in areas that maybe don't have the wealthiest residents, but have residents that need access to city services? And then another question that's going to be raised is around labor. Starting off, we've talked about having some sort of human in the loop, but as we scale and move to more autonomous systems, what are the workers who are pulled into this ecosystem going to be doing in the future? And then this all feeds into this last question of social license. So one thing that's amazing to me is that, despite the fact we have about 40,000 deaths every year in this country from cars, nobody's calling for a ban on automobiles. So how did that come about? And I think it's really because people see the benefit to their own lives from automobile technology. And we're going to need to drive the same type of insight around aerial mobility. If people see how it's going to benefit them and their communities, they're going to be willing to make the investments and take the risks needed to enable this technology. And if they just view it as something for the privileged few, they're not going to be open to making those investments and taking those risks. And I just want to end with a few thoughts from how the World Economic Forum views technology. Most importantly is that technology is implemented by design. Our future is not determined by the technology, it is determined by the choices we make in this room about how this technology is going to be deployed. And I'm excited to be here and be part of this community that is making those decisions that is going to set our future for the coming decades. Thank you very much.
Andrew Lohn, drone researcher, RAND.
All right. So for those of you who aren't familiar with RAND Corporation, we're a nonprofit organization that brings together researchers from all sorts of disciplines like physics and mathematicians. We've got anthropologists. And what we do is we work in the public interest to do research. We're not affiliated with any companies or any political party. And one of these topics that we've decided is important to look at is drones. That's why we're here. And RAND is most famous for drones like these military drones. Over the last several decades, we've done a lot of work there. But obviously, everyone here knows that these urban mobility situations, delivery drones, which we're going to focus on in this talk, but then eVTOL as well, are becoming important realities and issues that policymakers need to address. And so some of those issues are the design of the drones, the logistics and the operations, the airspace issues, and potentially privacy issues. But we have small reports on all of these that we've put out. I've specifically worked on the operations, so that's what I'll talk about today. And the way that I went about that, it wasn't originally set out to be this, but it ended up seeming that making mathematical equations was the best way to address these issues. And so these mathematical equations incorporate things like the ground transport and the aerial transport, and then we validated as much as we could with the data that was available to us, far less than obviously what Uber has available to them. But the first issue that we wanted to address with these equations was the city energy consumption for delivery drones. If delivery drones can proceed at this scale, then what sort of energy would be used as compared to the current status quo? And so we get these big, long equations. This one's kind of condensed, but it's really not as bad as it sounds. It's all the stuff you would expect, things like the trucking distances and the energy to restock your drone centers. How far do the drones fly, vertical lift, efficiencies on the drones. And so the interesting thing here is that it gives us it tells you what the important variables are for policymakers. If they're concerned about something, what are the variables they can tweak to have the most impact? But it doesn't tell us the scale, and so in order to understand the scale, we applied this equation with some rough inputs that correspond roughly to a variety of cities: Los Angeles, Tokyo, Kigali, and Minneapolis. And then we can take a look. You just plot the graphs. This is the fraction of drones. So as you scale up the percentage of drones delivering in these different cities, what are the impacts? And what we're seeing, originally I was pretty skeptical. I thought it was going to be, I didn't think this was going to be possible. I'd become a believer. Even in the worst cases, these large cities like Tokyo, which are high density, you still can get to a pretty comparable level of energy consumption. And in some cases, like a smaller city, Kigali and Minneapolis, you can get to be more efficient with drone deliveries. And if you increase the number of drone centers that are doing deliveries, you can do better in all cases. Okay, so then another problem that we wanted to address, we had several others. I can only talk about a couple today, but this one, congestion and overhead coverage. Are these, if we're delivering at this scale, are drones going to block out the sky, or are you never going to see one? And so we have different equations that try to address that stuff. And this is what we have for the overhead coverage. Obviously, if you're closer to one of these drone centers, you'll have a higher likelihood of there being drones overhead. And so what we're showing here is the fraction of the city that will have some number of drones expected at any one time within their viewing radius. And we're talking about, for a city like LA, maybe a quarter of the city will have a probability of like a half of a drone overhead at any given time. So certainly not blocking out the sky. As you get closer, it'll be higher. And then obviously, what I'm showing here is that if you increase the drone centers, that helps again to bring down the overhead coverage. And so just to wrap up really quickly, there are a variety of things. First, we really believe that just rough first-order analysis like these can help give policymakers an understanding of what the scale of the problems are, understand what are the issues and what things are not actually issues to deal with. We're showing that delivery drones appears to make sense in at least some environments, and maybe in all. And I'd like to say that, to reiterate, that this approach, these equations, can help to identify what are the real impacts from the things that are not, what are the options that policymakers have, and what will be the impacts on people, on the folks like you. And so what we're trying to do, this is all delivery drones, we're trying to extend out to eVTOL and people movers. The same sort of analysis could be very useful. The policymakers will know which issues are important, which ones are not important. They can say which variables to change in order to address those issues. And they'll also know, if they make those decisions, what the impacts will be like for people who are trying to design the aircraft, design the batteries, design the skyports. And thank you.
Michael Scheibenreif, Drone Corridor Lead, Unicef.
Good morning, everyone. I think you made it English-speaking people start to pronounce your family name correctly. I was quite impressed right now. My name is Michael, and I'm living in Malawi, and I'm working for Unicef. Malawi is a landlocked country in sub-Saharan Africa. It's one of the poorest countries on this earth. It has the highest premature birth rate worldwide. It has the highest maternity mortality rate in sub-Saharan Africa. And we're facing a lot of infrastructural issues as well. So it's one of my son's daily routine to try and check to switch on the lights, because we have a lot of power outages. And normally if the lights work, the whole family is going, whoa, lights, let's switch them on. And yet we are incredibly privileged, because we are one of the 8% of households who are actually connected to the power grid, imagine. And it's part of my routine to take my kids to the clinic every time one of them is down with fever, because we are incredibly scared of malaria. And yet again, we are incredibly privileged because we have access to healthcare. So what am I doing in Malawi? I'm working for Unicef, which is a UN specialized agency working in 190 countries to save children's lives and protect their rights. And Unicef is a very innovative UN agency. So Unicef understands that working with drones, data, and GIS reference data will substantially change the way we are delivering our mandate. This is also why Unicef and the government of Malawi have set up the drone testing corridor in Kasungu, which is the project I'm managing. Unicef is basically interested in 3 use cases with drones: in transport, connectivity, and image capturing. Let's start with transport. That's the traditional way to transport things in Malawi. I think I'm probably preaching to the choir if I'm saying that integrating drones in supply chain will fundamentally change the way we are delivering medicine to remote and rural areas. Instead of having the village doctor ride his bicycle on a dirt track for 4 hours and 4 hours back again, if he manages to do that at all, if it's not flooded, we can have just-in-time delivery to the point of care. For that, we come to our second use case, connectivity, because this doctor will need to be able to talk to the district hospital. We've got a very patchy mobile phone network, which is why we want to use drones to create connectivity. I really like this picture because in the back you can see this island of sun rays coming down, which I think very well represents a connectivity drop. If you take a drone working as a relay, flying over an area, picking up the 3G or 4G signal, if it's existing, and relaying it downwards, you can also reach areas which are normally deprived of connectivity. The other way to connect this area is using drones as a flying USB stick. I always have to wrap my head around that. A drone physically transporting data in its fuselage and deliver it somewhere, once or twice a day. This will enable the doctor to communicate with the district hospital. And our third use case is imagery. This is faculty from Kyoto University. They were in Malawi to test a project with consumer drones and how to use them in order to advise subsistence farmers on soil management. What crop to plant, what fertilizer to use in order to increase productivity. We're also using drones for flood preparedness. So we are taking the pictures, creating 3D models which allow us to understand where the flood will hit first and whom we have to evacuate at what time in order to not have them drown. We also use drones in post-disaster response. If you imagine after a disaster, it's crucial, very, very important to have first insight and situational awareness. You will need to know where to guide your first responders to in order to be efficient. Coming back to cities, one of the coolest projects we're doing right now is linking drone-acquired imagery, orthomosaics, giant ones, to artificial intelligence. We're currently doing a project against cholera. We had a cholera outbreak in Lilongwe in Malawi, and drones are flying the area, are mapping the area, and we are uploading all of these giant maps to artificial intelligence, image classifiers. They point out where are houses, where are latrines, where can you find open water sources? Because a lot of houses in Malawi don't have latrines. So if you can identify an area without latrines, that's very likely an open defecation area. If you have unprotected water sources there, boom, cholera will hit. So we can create vulnerability maps or heat maps, which help us to work on that. But Drones are not UNICEF's core business. While we're working on an ecosystem, we established the first UTM on the African continent in the Dresden corridor. We're working on training local expertise, but it's not our core business. We need the industry. We need you guys to work with us in order for us to help us understand what's possible and how we can move forward. And this is the reason why I'm here today. So if you're interested in collaborating or partnering with UNICEF, just give me a hello or contact us via our website. Thank you very much.
Rick Sherlock, President and CEO, Association of Air Medical Services.
Good morning. The Association of Air Medical Services is the international trade association for providers of helicopter emergency medical services, fixed-wing emergency medical services, and ground critical care services. Emergency medical services, especially air medical transports, are a very critical part of well, I think I've just gone off my area, are a very critical part of an evolving healthcare system. And it's getting even more critical. Today, there are roughly 1,000 helicopters providing air medical services, air medical transport services in the United States. But the reason that's becoming even more critical is that since 1990, 22% of America's hospitals have closed and over 340 trauma centers have closed. That means patients are traveling longer distances, especially in rural areas of the United States, to get to critical emergency services. You only have about an hour to 2 hours to get someone with a stroke, heart attack, or severe trauma to the right level of care, and it can make a very significant difference in that patient's outcome. And so what we do, why we're relevant to today's discussions, are that emergency medical services use new technology, even when those services and that new technology may not be designed for medicine. There was a study at the University of Kansas that shows a 7% drop in ground ambulance usage in cities where Uber has been introduced. So what does that mean? It means that though the first person to use an Uber Elevate might not be a patient, but somewhere in that first 10 passengers, there will be a patient. So whether you know it or not, Uber already is in the ground medical transport program and will become involved in the air medical transport services as things go forward. There are further reports from Forbes, NPR, and others that say that number of Uber users actually prefer to use Uber as opposed to ground ambulance services to get to the hospital. When you talk about transportation, air medical services aren't just transportation. It's actually bringing capability to the patient to start medical treatment. Over 90% of our patients' transports are for severe trauma, stroke, or heart attack. And again, there's a very limited window, and getting them directly to the right medical attention can make a significant difference in their outcome. So how do we do that? We have to have a concerted dialogue as to how Uber is integrated into the airspace system, along with UAVs. There has to be an upfront discussion about how to do that logically, because a lot of the discussion about unmanned vehicles has been centered around airport traffic areas and major airports. The majority of our flights occur in low-level airspace, in many cases across the United States and around the world in uncontrolled airspace, where the sky might look very wide open and empty from the ground up. But as a helicopter pilot, I can say, when you're responsible for your passengers, when you're responsible for the people you're flying and your patients, you're very concerned about how to integrate with other vehicles in low-level airspace without the proper identification and ability to see them. One of the other things that goes into that is pilot's perspective. A pilot has a perspective on where another aircraft, manned aircraft, is moving that you might not have in an unmanned aircraft. So how do we go forward with this? We go forward in a way that has these dialogues, asks all these questions, and intentionally looks to integrate capabilities for Uber Elevate, Uber Air, along with the other air traffic users in the United States and around the world. So I look forward to conversations. I look forward to seeing you around the rest of the conference today. And if you have any questions about this, please feel free to stop and ask. And again, I hope that this is the beginning of the discussion, that we put some intentionality as to how we all share the same low-level airspace properly and safely. Thanks very much.
Seleta Reynolds, General Manager, LADOT.
Good morning. I'm Seleta Reynolds. I run the Department of Transportation. Welcome to Los Angeles. This is a live shot of me inside my office from yesterday. This is what I do every day. This is what it feels like to run the Department of Transportation in a city like Los Angeles that is steeped in challenges, incredible challenges, because of the system that we built and the way we manage and operate it. But we think a lot about the promise and opportunity of tomorrow, and we're bombarded every day with images like this. And I have to say that if the future looks like today, but the cars fly, we will have failed. We will have maybe solved a technology problem, but we won't have solved a compelling city problem. These are the problems that we think about, that we want to solve at the DOT. In Los Angeles, you can get to 12 times as many jobs in an hour by car as in an hour by transit. And in fact, if you make less than $80,000 a year in Los Angeles, you are considered low income. If we consider the continuation of this trend, we will lose all of the things about the city that we love. Its access to opportunity, its hospitality, its generosity. So, we think about how we can integrate transportation choices at the ground level, the incredible power of cities to convene and create places. Because it can't just be about the services and the vehicle. It has to be about how these services integrate into the fabric of our neighborhoods to connect each other to the things that we love. So how do we do that? We have to have a completely different map of the city and a completely different idea of the role of the DOT in the 21st century. The Department of Transportation cannot just deliver infrastructure. We have to think like a product company, and we have to think differently about public right-of-way that will now extend from the ground under your feet all the way up to 2,000 feet in the air. The FAA may let you fly, but it's cities who will let you land. And as we think about code as our new concrete, the opportunities to solve real problems and real challenges only open up if we are at the table together and talking about these incredible opportunities in front of us. The other problem we are trying to solve is safety. 260 people died last year on the streets of Los Angeles, streets that I manage and operate. We look at the incredible track record in aviation and think about the opportunities. We ask ourselves, why is this so? Well, it's because in the 40s and 50s, in order to usher in the arrival of the jet age, the FAA was created for pilots by pilots. Safety is not a feature in the air the way it is on the ground. And the opportunity here is to hold the bar high and to usher in the autonomous age, not just in the sky, but on the ground, by making sure that every time there is an incident, safety knowledge is not tribal, but becomes a community responsibility of all of the people in this room. Our opportunity here is really to get the things that we love. More kids playing in the street, growing up, and inspiring the pilots and the passengers of tomorrow. Thank you.
Joshua Schank, Chief Innovation Officer, LA County Metro.
Hello. So I am the Chief Innovation Officer at LA Metro. LA Metro has an Office of Extraordinary Innovation, and that's what I do. You might think extraordinary innovation sounds like something out of a Harry Potter novel, but it really is trying to focus on innovations that will help Angelenos today. LA County has 10 million residents, but only 1.3 million riders of public transit every day, which is low for a major city of its size. LA Metro not only plans, but builds and operates the transportation system for the entire county. The problem is that the transportation system here isn't working. I'm sure none of you took public transit to get here today. That's probably because it doesn't get here very easily. But it's also because we've got a congestion problem that is making things not function. And in order to reduce that congestion problem, we're going to have to get rid of single occupancy vehicles. There are just too many of them. Because when people are driving alone, they are taking up valuable street space, where street space is a very, very valuable commodity. So what do? Well, at the Office of Extraordinary Innovation, we try new stuff. And we try new stuff that we can implement now, because taxpayers, unlike venture capitalists, are holding us accountable for what we do immediately. So what we've got is an unsolicited proposal policy. It allows anyone with an idea to submit it. We've received, since February 2016, over 100 unsolicited proposals. These unsolicited proposals come in, and we think about whether that's an idea that we can incorporate into our business model quickly. And the advantage of doing this is that while large 10,000-person bureaucracies are really good at looking out for the everyday person in Los Angeles County, and the average person riding our system makes a household income of about $19,000 a year, what we're not good at doing is we're not good at coming up with new technology ideas. We're not good at moving quickly. And what this is intended to do is allow us to be open to those types of ideas from the private sector. I'm going to run through a few that we're doing. We're going to be piloting microtransit. This is a concept that Uber has been doing for a while now with its Uber Pool service. We're going to see what happens when a public sector agency tries to do this so that it's accessible to everyone and affordable to everyone. Because this type of service has real potential compared to our existing bus service, which may come at some point if you wait long enough. It's going to sit in traffic most likely. But microtransit service could give you point-to-point services that are more effective and still affordable and accessible for all. We're also doing a partnership with a transportation network company called Via, which is going to be coming to Los Angeles and helping people get to and from 3 of our stations. Like Uber, except that they have only shared rides, and they are able to make those rides accessible to all. Because there are a lot of people who can't currently use Uber or Lyft or those other types of services to get to and from our transit stations. And in Los Angeles, if you can't get to and from a transit station, you're not alone. It's difficult to do. There's not that many of them. It's a big space. What this will do is allow people who can't currently afford it, or might not have smartphones, or perhaps don't have bank accounts, or perhaps are disabled, to be able to use these services to access our stations. That's launching in July. Metro also operates a network of express lanes on the freeways here. You can bypass traffic on a couple of freeways right now by paying a toll. Well, right now we do this in a very clunky old way, which is you have a transponder on your vehicle, and that vehicle drives under a gantry and it collects the toll. Well, what if we could just do it with a phone? Somebody proposed this as an idea that, well, people will just have phones and pay their tolls that way. We can move our gantries around. We can make it easier for the end user. We're going to be testing that. The RFP came out last week to see what this is like if we use phones instead of transponders. It's really important for people to know when their vehicle is coming. When you call an Uber, you know when it's coming. And that's a pretty good marker of when it's coming. Well, you don't necessarily know when our buses are coming. The reason? We also often don't know where our buses are. Pretty simple solution. Throw a GPS on the bus and have a good algorithm for predicting when it arrives. This is an idea that is kind of one of those things where you say, well, why weren't we doing this already? Well, because we didn't have an Office of Extraordinary Innovation. Bike racks. A lot of people trying to get to our stations by bike. But when you get there, it is difficult to find a place to park that bike safely. This is a very simple concept that allows you to roll your bike up. Use your tap card, which is the card that you use to ride Metro. Tap, open the lock, put it in, tap to close the lock, walk away. Safe, on our property, easy, makes it simpler to get to and from our stations. Simple idea for us to implement. Smart vehicle and infrastructure communication. This is an idea of, again, something very simple. Our Orange Line buses currently operate where they are synchronized with LADOT's traffic lights, but the drivers don't know what speed to drive in order to make every one of those lights. Very simple idea. Put a phone on their dashboard, tells them what speed to drive. They drive the correct speed, they make all the lights. Everybody's happy. These are the types of things that happen when you open your doors to new innovations that can be done quickly. And finally, I couldn't possibly not talk about drones at this conference. Somebody said, well, you're inspecting your tracks, and you're inspecting your facilities, and you're doing it with people. And that takes a long time. So why don't you use drones instead? And we were very open to the idea, but actually it's interesting, when we tested it, we found that the folks who proposed this knew very well how to fly drones, but knew nothing about inspecting tracks or facilities. And so what we've done is we've created an internal training program to train our own staff to use drones in order to inspect our stuff. So just a few ideas that we're doing. Thank you very much.
was awesome. All right, we're going to go to a very, very short break now. Sessions start at 10, just in a few minutes here. You'll have one starting here, Mark Moore and his vehicle engineering team. There are 2 other tracks in Amundsen and in Haas. So please start making your way there if you'd like to attend those. Or otherwise stay here. There is food available en route to the other sessions. So food and coffee. Great.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The program is about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The program is about to begin. Please welcome Mark Moore, Director of Engineering, Aircraft Systems, Uber.
Okay, taking your seats, we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive now, and I'm going to get some help from my team. I'm going to start by doing a quick introduction, give you the big picture. I believe we have Slido, so you may see a Slido show up in just a minute. Please feel free, we're saving a few minutes at the end so we can get into a dialogue and understand your questions and concerns. There you go, there's the Slido information. Let's go ahead and dive into it. So Adam and Ian are two members of my vehicle team that are going to follow up right after me. But let's see, there we go. Let me give you a feel for the entire day in terms of the vehicle content. So just for the next half hour, Adam, Ian, and myself will talk about the urban air mission, eVTOL requirements, as well as getting into the concepts. Then at 1 o'clock, Rob McDonald is going to do another session where he gets into the tools, techs, and testing efforts that we're engaged in. And then 1:30, we're going to have this wonderful panel with Mel Johnson from the FAA and talk about how these vehicles are going to be certified. At 2 o'clock, we saved the best for last. We're going to have a whole bunch of design experts, the people who are actually designing these new vehicles and building them. They have a lot of lessons learned, and they've agreed to be on a panel and share that with all of us. So an exciting day ahead. Just for an introduction for what Adam and Ian are going to be presenting, just a few words on the urban air mission itself. And that is, what's different is these are very much close proximity operations, right? These vehicles are right there in the middle of the city doing these operations. And I've kind of listed like 3 different levels. As you see different eVTOL concepts or approaches to entering this market, really, you can grade them on 3 different levels. The first one is the bare minimum for being able to enter this market, right? The door that's opening all these close proximity operations is to be able to achieve very, very high safety and very, very low noise. So helicopters have not been successful, especially because they haven't been able to be community friendly. Their noise is way too high. You'll see that for our goals on both the safety and noise, a 2 times better level of safety than cars today. So that's on the order of 10 to 20 times safer than current helicopter operations. And then for the noise, well, it's a bit more complicated, but to dumb it down to a starting point, it's about 15 dB quieter than what helicopters are at the equivalent size and weight. There's a lot more to it because you really need to get into time integrals and be able to understand the true annoyance in the context of a background. But that 15 dB gets you an idea of just how hard we need to be pushing the vehicles to a quieter solution. The next step really to get serious about urban air mobility is to be able to achieve a high throughput, to be a serious transportation solution, especially as you start to look at the intermodal delays, of accessing this intermodal system and aggregating the trips, pooling the trips together. Just the access, wait time, and then again, on the backside, you're talking about 7 minutes to be able to build in the intermodal delays. So that really means you got to be serious about speed. And if you look at some of the concepts and our partners, we don't embrace powered lift solutions, right? Our perspective from our requirements is you got to get wing-borne. If you can't get wing-borne, then you're going to be stuck at really slow speeds of 50, 60 miles per hour that can't give you the benefit of time, which is the value proposition for this new transportation system. So really to get to the 3rd level of being a serious, scaled, high-throughput urban solution, you've got to take on low operating costs and high reliability right from the beginning with these vehicles. So just a few more comments relating to why eVTOL are this wonderful new type of vehicle that has a perfect fit for this specific mission. And again, it gets back to this safety, noise, and efficiency. Safety, you really can't talk about the vehicle safety by itself. You always have to talk about the operational construct. 70% of the accidents are relevant to the operations or the pilot themselves. So you got to take on more than just the vehicle. About 20% of the accidents relate to mechanical failure. So that's where this distributed electric propulsion redundancy really is a game changer in dropping, getting rid of that 20% of mechanical failures. On noise, I'm showing you the simple things that everyone's doing who's trying to really be a low noise solution. There's so much going on under the hood, though. And in the next year or two, as companies start to come forward, you're going to see that they're doing much more than this in order to really embrace this ultra low noise signature. Efficiency, my last comment is, I actually like it that we have a severe energy constraint because we have to design these vehicles on a diet to be really, really efficient. And my concern is that if companies push to hybrid electric right from the beginning, then they don't have to take that energy constraint seriously. For us, we are all about all electric, battery only. We're not embracing hybrid, and there's many good reasons as we get into the discussions why we're doing that. So I'm going to go ahead and hand this off to Adam, who's going to get into some more information about the requirements. Adam Warmuth.
Thanks, Mark. All right, thanks, Mark. So as we've developed our vehicle requirements, we've taken a system-level approach to ensure that the vehicles will be as successful as possible on our network. You can see behind me some of those requirements highlighted in our Closer Than You Think video. Our requirements aren't just influenced by performance, but also factors such as safety, community and passenger acceptance, and compatibility with infrastructure. In one of these clips, you can see our pilot separation requirement. Now, this is not required by current Part 135 operations, but it's something that we're taking a stance on to go above and beyond to provide the highest levels of safety. You can also see called out here our speed requirement, which Mark talked about. We think that the speed required to serve this mission optimally is 150 miles an hour. And we think that in order to achieve that at high speed with low noise and low cost, that you need to have a wing. Let's dive a little deeper into why we think we need high speed. When we discuss the speed requirement, many people see the increasing speed as having decreasing marginal benefit, but there's actually a lot of second-order effects that aren't captured by that. The obvious things are the throughput. If you can fly fast, you can fly more missions per day, which creates better amortization of your fixed cost assets, such as your pilot and your infrastructure, which at the beginning are going to be the biggest cost drivers in the system. Another second-level effect here is the radius that we're able to serve with our multimodal network. So with a 100-mile-an-hour vehicle, you can pull from only about a mile around before the time savings you get would be just better served on the ground. But by going to 150 miles an hour, we're able to more than double that radius. And when we double the radius, that's a 4 times factor in the area we're able to pull from. And getting that density of trips around those nodes is crucial to providing high load factors, which is really going to be the main driver and if we're able to provide this affordably at scale. And at lunch, our head of operations, Stan Swaintek, will dive more into why affordability and demand are so inextricably linked. The other couple of requirements we have here are noise and the bird strike. And those are other examples of requirements where we're going above what regulations require based on the unique parts of our mission. And so we're designing the vehicles and the requirements to optimally serve our 75+ million users. And so to develop these requirements, we've done both technical and non-technical analysis to really understand what's going to best serve this network. So one of the things we've done is looked at payload distributions, looked at passenger weights across the US, including baggage, and looking at running Monte Carlo simulations to figure out the most probable, as well as the most extreme loadouts. And at the same time, we've surveyed thousands of our riders to figure out how they would feel about being weighed at the vertiport and what their preferences would be around that. We've also used our Flux Optimizer tool that you learned about on day 1 to really understand at a network level what load factors we think we can achieve and how the different parameters such as speed and range affect that. So as you heard from Rob on day 1, we're providing the substantiation documents as an exclusive benefit to our partners on the Elevate network. But in order to move this entire ecosystem forward, we are releasing a public version of these requirements. And this document was crafted in the spirit of the eVTOL Common Reference Models that Ian will tell you more about later. But the purpose of this is to kind of show the government and show academia and show all of our partners what our vision is and allow the entire ecosystem to be pushing towards a common shared vision and have all the results driving us forward. we've implemented various codes that allow us to understand how vehicles perform over the course of a mission and over the course of a mission day. The sawtooth pattern on the left represents how our mission is so unique from existing aircraft missions. We're not just thinking about range in terms of the 60-mile sizing mission. We're finding that what ends up sizing the vehicle is the ability to do this these repeated short hops throughout the day. And so we look at kind of a constraint plot here that looks at how the network design is linked to the vehicle design. And so we look at not the repeatable mission distance, which is our average mission across the network, and then the vehicle design in terms of how we size our battery. So we looked at our ECRM 003, and what we did was looked at how the range influences what size of vehicle we can build. And so there's a minimum battery size to meet the range, but it really gets interesting when we apply our repeatable mission distance and time. And so what this does is it says, how do we design our network to best serve the vehicle's capabilities, and how do we design the vehicle to best serve the network? So we start to understand where kind of the feasible design space is, and Ian's going to tell you more about how we've explored that design space.
How's it going?
All right, thanks, Ian.
Cool.
Oh, sorry.
Cool. Thanks, Adam. So as you see here, we found some compatible design space that was using a zero-order tool. And so now we'll dig into the ECRMs, how we actually go from requirements into a vehicle and really validate that the requirements make sense. But before we do that, I think it's really important that we look at current concepts, existing concepts in the space, right? It's really important to contextualize and understand what these concepts are capable of, and to really understand if the vehicles that exist today meet our market demand requirements. And if they don't, they tell us what we need to change in a vehicle that would be optimal for the Uber network. And they also just give us better design insights and understanding of how the ecosystem is viewing the problem, how they're integrating technologies, how they're approaching different things. So we're looking at several concepts. Up here, I'll show a few. We're looking at helicopters. We're looking at lift plus cruise configurations. We're looking at tiltrotor designs. So let's start with the lift plus cruise configuration. So it's a representative Kitty Hawk Cora. As you can see, it has optimized VTOL rotors, right? In terms of the complexity spectrum, it's on the lower end. So they've had a chance to really optimize the tilt and cant angles of those rotors. And that means it's very controllable in all phases of flight, which is really, really awesome. They're doing a great job there. You can also tell from this image that it's a two-passenger aircraft, right? And that means that it can't be piloted, not to meet the throughput that our market demands dictate. And lastly, you can tell from this wing, this high aspect ratio wing, that it's not going to move at the 150 miles per hour that our market says it should to meet our riders. In fact, if you do the in-depth analysis, you see that the LVRD max is probably closer to 90 miles per hour. Moving to this tilt rotor concept, we see that they're embracing a lot of VTOL complexity, right? So in cruise, they have two tip-mounted propellers rotating, but in VTOL, you have these inboard propellers that tilt upward and provide thrust and lift. And so that's really cool, right? That's something that would only be possible had you put in the engineering hours and really dug deep to do the right motor design and get the actuation concepts refined over time. It's a three-passenger aircraft, right? So it's piloted, very much in line with where we're going, but not the four passengers that we've seen. And it's a pretty clean configuration, right? 200 mile per hour max speed, and its LVRD max is probably close to the 150 miles per hour that we're going for. But wouldn't it have been great if there was a fifth seat and it really met all the market demands that we project and Adam just sort of told you about? And so we can then start comparing different concepts in the space, right? And we learn a lot. The liftless cruise configuration, they've got a battery that's compact in a sort of cube, right? A cube sort of pack. But if you look at the Tiltrotor, we see something that's integral to the wing. Probably utilizes pouch cells. And, they're going for something super dense. And so it's clear that looking at the ecosystem, we haven't reached a steady state where we understand what is the best way to integrate a battery. What is the gold standard for eVTOL design? And so because of this, we at Uber thought it was very, very important to sort of ground the industry, anchor it in concepts that we could all use, we could all learn, right? We can all discover and see and prove out through various analyses what makes the most sense. And so that sort of framed our ECRMs, our eVTOL Common Reference Models. So let's dig into that. Here's ECRM 001. It's a Tiltrotor configuration. You guys are fairly familiar with it. You saw it during the break. It starred in our Closer Than You Think video. And a lot of the design emphasis here was on the user experience. So if you remember the video and you step inside, you actually see that there's a really spacious cabin compartment. But we also wanted to focus on design features that we think are important for eVTOL. Laterally spaced propulsors, like our stack co-rotating propellers, are seen along the wingspan. And then you also see the stack co-rotating propellers along the tail. And so this is sort of showing that we're embracing the integration of new technologies and really seeing what that does for the vehicles. From ECRM 001, we then went to ECRM 002. It's very similar. You can tell there's a lot of similarities here. But instead of tilt rotors, right, you trade a little bit of the actuation for more weight and a separation, decoupling between your lift and cruise propulsors. An interesting fact here is also that the batteries are mounted inside the front portion of those nacelles. And then most recently, we have ECRM 003. You guys got a really nice look at those yesterday, thanks to Mark and Rob. But I want to dive a little bit deeper into this one and really show you the sorts of analyses, and we can't go into all of them, but the kinds of analyses we do to ensure that, at least at a first order level, they make sense with our requirements. So from the nice rendering, we go now to a cut of the open VSP configuration. And so the design intent here was to kind of trade, to see the effects of wetted area and safety, as opposed to much more streamlined design in ECRM 001, 002. We want to look at a variety of concepts. You also notice that there are batteries, and they're integrated in the nacelles, and they're 4 equal subpacks. They're not a cube. They're not integral to the wing. We think that shows a lot of promise for maintainability. And lastly, in Mark and Rob's talk yesterday, you saw an animation showing how we centered the center of thrust and the aerodynamic center. From that, you could then move the components and affect the arrangement such that your CG is also in that location when you're fully loaded. And so here's another shot of the OpenVSP model. Everything's an OpenVSP. The really great thing about OpenVSP is that it's parametric. It allows us to tie into a bunch of analysis tools. And we can really understand the effects of changes in the configuration quickly, because we can develop a tool chain around that and script up various analyses, like mass properties. So here's a weight statement that we developed for this model. It's an in-house weight modeling capability based off of a composite of various weight regression methods. Like I said, it's tied to the VSP geometry, but we're also doing tops-down and bottoms-up assessments. So as we learn more about components in the space and get more size, weight, and power information, we roll that in so that we're getting more accurate weights. And so to zoom into that, there's a pie chart basically showing the breakdowns. It's got a 59% empty weight fraction. We're assuming 1,100 pounds for the passengers and the pilot, and overall 5,780-pound takeoff gross weight. And so you might be thinking 59% is a little high, right? But then immediately we look at the regressions, and it actually correlates with other light civil aircraft. The same way we streamline our analyses with mass properties, we do the same for cruise aerodynamics. So from the OpenVSP model, you can generate a set that you can then take into your induced drag tool of choice. Here, you're looking at AVL. And then you can pair that with the parasite drag buildup tool from OpenVSP itself to then go to a drag buildup. And so what we're visualizing here is L over D versus speed. And at least for this configuration, while there's a lot of wetted area, you're still able to achieve high enough L over D around the speed range we want, that 150 miles per hour. And so, like I said, because it's parametric, you can iterate on the design. So you see a few different curves here. And so as we've optimized sort of the twist distribution, changed the wetted area, thinned up some of the nacelles and the fuselage, you see the L over D increasing, but still in that speed range that we're looking for. And again, we always want to make sure that we're not unreasonable. So we go back to the correlations and we see it looks reasonable. And so here's sort of a visualization of how it changed, right? You can see we thinned it up. We'll do it a few more times. You also might notice that the cruise propeller changed. We're doing those analyses too, just there's not enough time. And so going back to the constraint plot that Adam showed, there's ECRM 003. So they're available now. We're really excited about this. Never before has it been this easy to push a button, get an eVTOL design. So if you go to our webpage right now and you hit ECRM, you'll see this screen. You click, you get it, and we'll have a white paper coming soon. So some of the main reasons why we have ECRMs, just to sum up: tools validation, requirements validation, technology validation, reaching out to new stakeholders, and encouraging comparative assessment. So we've seen a really great relationship so far with these partners, and actually we've had a lot of success in academia. So those of you in academia today, please reach out. We'd love to engage you. We've had a lot of success with Georgia Tech and Coventry University through their Safety by Design class. Here's sort of an example of the fault tree analysis they conducted as part of that class for ECRMs 001 and 002. And they really went the extra mile and dug deep into an abbreviated Petri net analysis. Oops, a little bit early. Can we get that back up there? There we go. So they were able to break out into the different systems, subsystems, components, and do the stochastics and understand a little bit more about failure rates and what it takes to design these eVTOLs safely. So we don't have a lot of time. I want to make sure we have Slido questions. Oops. So there you go. If we could bring Mark and Adam back on stage, please go to uberair.com, download those, and I think we're opening it up to Slido, right?
Yeah, let's see if some Slido questions show up. I'll just say you'll notice, like as we have shown the different ECRMs, in particular ECRM 3, the intent there was really to understand the different places we could put the batteries and what sort of penalties were associated with each. You'll also notice that it had a weird single aisle, so we're looking and exploring to understand how different ride-sharing privacy concerns could be addressed fundamentally in the design. So, and you notice it's pretty heavy because of those fundamental design decisions that were being made up front. So, Slido questions. Here we go. There we go. What type of training requirements do you expect to put on your pilots? Will you leverage FAA commercial licensing? That's really an operations question, so if you attend some of the sessions that Stan is putting on, but from our starting point, we are looking certainly at utilizing pilots in the first years and building in the background autonomy. Just like with our self-driving cars, proving the autonomy over many, many years that it's ready. We would be starting with commercial helicopter pilots that would be trained specifically for these different vehicles. We're anticipating that each of our partners would have their own pilot training programs that are specific to their vehicle. what else? Will you leverage? I think we'll leave that for the operations question. Do you think that separate lift plus cruise propulsion systems will have too much weight and aerodynamic drag when not in use? You guys want to talk about that?
Sure. I mean, I think what we showed, and granted we breezed through it really fast, but on a first order basis, we were able to reach the 60-mile range in the repeated 3-hour mission. I think there are clever ways to reduce weight and reduce drag, but on our side, we have no benefit to not being conservative on weights, right? So we want to be honest about those. I think the right configuration would be able to.
Yeah, I would just note that if you analyze Cora is an awesome design, but it was designed for low speed. If you try to push the Cora design, which is a lift plus cruise design, up to 150 miles per hour, there's a lot of parasite drag there. And so that L over D drops way down to perhaps 7 or 8. So there's a very important point here that if you're going to embrace lift plus cruise, you got to find a way to get rid of all those propellers and all that parasite drag. And that is precisely the intent of the stacked co-rotating technology, to be able to, with a very simple articulation, in an unloaded state, be able to just pop up or pop down and be able to submerge those lift plus cruise systems. It is extra weight, but it's lift plus cruise is much lower complexity and therefore higher reliability than the articulating systems. And again, when you have an articulating system such as a tilt rotor, you have a lot of cyclic loads that are happening in that system as you're going through that rotation. So it's a very stressed environment. And so that's why you see this debate between how much articulation complexity to embrace versus the simplicity of a lift plus cruise design. Next question. Your ECRM is built around 300 plus watt-hours per kilogram battery packs, yet current state of the art from yesterday is 180 watt-hours per kilogram. How does this affect accuracy of the results? The battery pack specific energy has a significant impact, especially with the vehicles that are less clean. So, for instance, with the ECRM3, you saw that it's an L over D at cruise of about 12, while a concept such as Carum is much, much cleaner at cruise, right? Lift-to-drag ratio that's significantly higher. So while the Carum concept can do really well, even with current state batteries, our ECRM3 would really grow considerably at these less advanced battery levels. So you can see there's a lot of trade-offs, and the most significant trade-off is on that specific energy of the battery pack.
Well, and at the pack level, we're not doing anything over 300 watt-hours per kilogram right now. And if you look at the first shots, if you remember, the nacelle was a little bit larger, so you could fit a little bit more battery pack there, and we actually sized it for some 2020 batteries as well.
Yep. So we'll just maybe, Adam, you want to take one more question, and then we'll close it up?
Yeah. So the battery swap, we've looked a lot of this on, as I talked about, from the system level perspective in terms of what it's going to take in terms of operations and how that interfaces with the vehicle design. When we talk about having a non-homogeneous fleet and you have different vehicles with different battery pack designs, it starts to become kind of like an operational nightmare to have to, we're embracing this ecosystem with lots of, diverse concepts operating on our network. And if you want to have, the robotic battery swap technology that's going to be able to charge as fast as we're able to charge would have to be highly specialized, would take up a lot of space, and you would have to have one for each different vehicle type concept, and then if 5 vehicle type concepts arrive at Skyport, right? So that's where we're really taking the system level approach to understanding our requirements.
Great, we're going to wrap it up there. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
Please welcome Selena Mikowajczuk, Director of Engineering, Battery Systems, Uber.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for joining this session. So yesterday I talked a lot about what we were looking for in a battery, our broad vision. There's a lot that makes a great battery pack, and we could spend a long time on that. One of the first things people always ask when you talk about a battery pack is, well, what kind of cells are you going to use, right? Most people at first are asking what kind of form factor, you're going pouch, cylindrical, whatever. And we could spend a couple hours on that topic. But more important question is what is actually inside the cells, whatever case that you use. At that point, people are usually thinking about chemistry, capabilities, the capacity, the impedance of the cells. You're also thinking about quality, you're thinking about reliability. As you work in the battery industry, you realize that not all cells are created equal. You realize that cells are also really a marvel of multidisciplinary engineering and manufacturing. They are really complex, really advanced manufactured products. So because of that, we're very excited and pleased to be able to announce Mali as a partner for us for our air mobility systems. I've known the guys from Mali for about 15 years. I've admired their work for quite a while. So because of that, I'm super pleased to be working with them. I've invited Paul Craig, he's the Director of Technology for E1 Mali Energy, to come and tell us about the cells and about his company. Paul began his career in 1986 in the R&D department at Mali, and at that point in time, he was designing manufacturing equipment for lithium metal rechargeable cells. This predates the lithium-ion revolution. With the advent of lithium-ion technologies, he began working in advanced program management. He designed fuel gauges for battery packs, and then spent time specifying and approving batteries for military, medical, and commercial use. Now, as the Director of Director of Technology, he's the key interface between industry and the R&D development team at E1 Mali. So please welcome Mr. Paul Craig, a good friend of mine.
Got ahead of myself already. Good morning. Thank you very much, Selena, for the kind words. Yeah, Selena mentioned I've been in this industry for a long time. How many here have been in the same company, show of hands, for over 30 years? Oh, 1, 2, 3. There's a few of us. Good. How many of you have had the same email address for over 30 years? Because you want to talk about junk mail. Have the same email address for 30 years, you can get a lot of junk mail. So yeah, I've been at Mali Energy for 30 years, 32 years. It's been a long sentence, no sign of parole. I just want to take you back a little bit in the history of our company and also the history of lithium rechargeable batteries. In 1977, we became the first company in the world to develop lithium rechargeable batteries. And in 1987, 10 years later, we became the first company in the world to manufacture high-volume lithium metal rechargeable batteries for the consumer market. This was an interesting exercise. We learned very quickly, not quickly enough, that lithium metal technology has some fundamental problems. So as we moved away from that, we became a Japanese-owned company in 1999. Sorry, yeah, 1990. And NEC bought us. At that time, Sony, Sanyo, and Panasonic all had their own battery divisions. NEC didn't, so they were looking for a way into this industry, and they purchased us. So we got into the lithium-ion industry. Following that, we were then bought out at the end of the 1990s by a Taiwanese company, and we got into the business of power cells. Power tools at that point in time were all NiCad and nickel metal hydride powered. Lithium-ion was something very new to the power tool industry, and we became the first company in the world to develop high-power cells using a 26700 cell size for the power tool industry for a company called Milwaukee Electric Tools. After that little venture, we got into the developing cells for automotive. It was a very topical time in 2007, 2008 to really get into the automotive industry. So we were developing a 30 amp hour prismatic cell for the electric vehicle. This never went to market, but it allowed us to learn a lot about wide temperature range, long cycle life, and high performance cells or high performance chemistries for lithium ion cells. We followed that with some additional high power cells using an NCA chemistry, and more recently developed a 2700 cell in 2016 for a very well-known consumer application that's currently in the market. Following that, what we've come to market with right now and what was shown yesterday in the data is an INR 21700 P42A. This is a 4.2 amp hour cell design using NCA chemistry, and this particular cell is what Selena's team used to model their mission profile and indicated that a cell of this class would be capable today of meeting requirements for a eVTOL application. Just quickly, what's in the name? As I mentioned, we came from lithium metal technology. The technology we used at the time was using a MOS2 cathode, molybdenum disulfide, and a lithium metal anode. The cell part speaks for itself. So that's where the name MollyCell comes from. A lot of people ask the question, you know, who are you guys? Everybody knows about Samsung, everybody knows about Sony or Murata now, Panasonic, LG. These are all big consumer brands that people know about. If you're in the lithium-ion battery industry, you probably know MollyCell because we've been around longer than anyone, but you don't know where we're coming from specifically, so this is just a quick slide. The Coos Group owns us. They're one of the largest private companies in Taiwan, and they actually own TCC, which is the largest cement manufacturer in Taiwan and one of the largest concrete manufacturing companies in Asia. So we have big pockets, but not on the consumer electronics side. So that's where a lot of our backing has come from over the years. And we're just a little company on the bottom of the slide there. Hoping Power is actually a coal-fired generation company. A lot of these companies in this portfolio generate a lot of CO2. We're a nice little green company on the bottom corner of the Coos Group's portfolio. Our locations are in Vancouver, BC, where I live and work, in a little place called Maple Ridge. We also have manufacturing in Tainan in the south of Taiwan near Kaohsiung, and in Taipei is our head office. As far as our manufacturing facilities go and our facility overview in general, in Taiwan we have a 637,000 square foot manufacturing facility, and with about 500 people, it's currently manufacturing 4 million cells per month. We're just installing some new capability, and we'll be up to 8 million cells per month at the end of the year. We'll talk about that a little later. The R&D facility, it's 142,000 square feet with 70 employees. We got a lot of room. We can play a lot of ball hockey if necessary. This facility used to manufacture lithium-ion cells, 18650s, 2 million cells per month. But now, in 2007, we moved all of our manufacturing to Taiwan, and now we strictly do the R&D. So the cells that Selena's testing right now and her team were designed in Canada, prototyped in Canada, and then manufactured in Taiwan. The Taiwan facility was originally built in 2000. In 2010, we expanded the factory to add an additional fully automatic assembly line. We built the bottom photo in this, on these slides. We built out the building, just the first 2 floors, but they actually build the elevators 5 stories high. So that when we want to expand the building, we can actually, we have infrastructure in the building of the elevators to build out more manufacturing capability. So this year, we're just adding an additional high-speed assembly line. We'll bring our manufacturing capability to 8 million cylindrical cells per month. Based on the demand, and it's extremely high right now, we do anticipate that we will expand additionally in the future. The markets that we're typically in, consumer electronics, military, medical, and industrial. I'll just quickly go to the next slide. Military radio, the Singars radio. We were the first company approved to use the lithium ion in the Singars radio for the US military and other military services. The 6T engine start battery is used to start tanks and personnel carriers. This is a new application for lithium ion, and we're currently in that. In the medical industry, defibrillators and infusion pumps, this includes class 3 medical, life-sustaining medical applications, such as LVAs and heart pumps. And on the industrial side, asset tracking and intrinsically safe applications. Our cells can be used in mining and oil and gas for intrinsic safe use. When it comes to safety and reliability, probably the highest profile application that we have for our cells is the spacesuits at the International Space Station run on our 18650 2.4 amp hour cells. This is a standard product that NASA procured from us and proved through their COTS program, their Consumer Off-the-Shelf program, that lithium-ion cells are safe and reliable enough to be used at the International Space Station to power the spacewalks. This includes all of the systems inside of the spacesuits for life support, cooling, heating, and other life-sustaining aspects of the spacesuit. It's a 5S16P 18650 battery, 700 watt hours, and it's been flying since 2011. This was a lot of collaboration with NASA and ABSL and their partners. They basically took the cells and did a lot of work to give them the comfort level that they could be used at the International Space Station, and they gave us the comfort level as well that they could be used in this application. I think the important part about this application is that we didn't design a special cell for NASA. NASA used our standard off-the-shelf cells off the end of our assembly line and put them into this application. So fundamentally, our designs and our control systems and our quality control in the system that we have builds in the quality and performance to be in applications like this. Another application that we really enjoyed working on was the electric Mini Cooper with BMW. In this case, we actually designed the cells and assembled the modules for them. We're not actually a module assembly company, but when they asked us to do it, we took it on. It was a very large battery, 35 kilowatts for the time, and a lot of fun to drive. At the end of the program, if you come and visit our facility sometime, we actually have one of those Mini Coopers sitting in the atrium in our factory. Over a couple of beers one night, I convinced them to give me one. I was hoping they were going to let me drive it home, but they just let me put it in the factory. The final application I just want to talk about here a little bit is energy storage. It's quite topical these days. It is very dollar per watt hour sensitive. So it is something that we're working towards, getting the energy storage to the point where we can get our cells in bulk energy storage. In fact, these street lights you see on the left-hand side of this photo are the street lights in front of our factory in Taiwan. And those street lights are being powered by a lithium-ion battery at the base of the pole, and during the daytime they are charged. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight into who we are. I didn't want to take too much time on this presentation and talk about the technical details. There's going to be plenty of opportunity for that, but I just at least wanted to give you some insight into who Uber's partner is and what we do and what we've done. And thank you very much for your time.
Cool. My name is Nikhil. I think most of you met me at this point. Today we're going to talk about community acceptance. So as we spoke about yesterday, as we spoke about several times actually, Elevate and Uber Air can only become truly operational at the scale that we aspire to if we're accepted in communities. And we're already starting to work very, very closely with Dallas, work very, very closely with Los Angeles in order to understand what sort of activities Uber needs to undergo and how we're going to engage with communities, with cities worldwide in order to make sure Uber Air is a service that integrates really, really well with the fabric of cities. And so we've been partnering with a number of folks over the last 6+ months, and we have a lot of work to do in 2018 and beyond. I don't have my clicker, Lex. Thank you. We are evolving beyond just the physics of the problem. We're moving from sound pressure levels towards the physiological effects of sound. And we're better understanding loudness and audibility for people in communities and how they react to the sound that these aircraft will make. And we have multiple initiatives underway to advance these efforts. One of those is acoustic monitoring in Dallas. We announced this in July. I think you saw it on the video yesterday. But we're doing this in Dallas now. We'll be doing it in LA soon to better understand the loudness of existing urban soundscapes, the attenuation of sounds in urban environments that can inform essentially predictive models that allow us to effectively estimate the loudness at any urban location, in any different pocket within an urban location, and understand how that loudness changes throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the year. That's our baseline. With that, we can work with DOT Volpe to incorporate new loudness metrics into our advanced acoustics model to improve tools. And those tools will be used to evaluate vehicles as our partners develop them, so we can understand what effect those vehicles will have on the soundscape, particularly at skyports, and as we're making operational decisions, so that when we say, okay, hey, we're going to put a skyport here, or we'll make certain takeoff or landing operational decisions, we'll understand exactly how that will affect the city at those specific sites against the baseline. There's a lot of work to do, and we're leaning super heavily on the expertise of David Josephson. I think those of you who were here last year have met David, or who are part of the community have met David. So I'll stop talking, and I'll let the experts take over. So before I do that, let me call out, much of what we present today will be a progression of the information presented last year, and it'll be challenging to keep up if you haven't been exposed to the metrics and concepts before. But let me recommend that you engage with David, with Joseph and Juliet at the listening station. It's over in Amundsen in the foyer. They'll be there all day, and you can listen to VTOL sounds in a kind of a closed environment and various background settings on headphones. And so David is great. He will answer any and all questions you need to know. So is Joseph and Juliet, who are with him. And so without further ado, let's bring them on stage. David?
Please welcome David Josephson, Noise and Acoustics Consultant, Josephson Engineering.
Good morning. Let's see what we have here. We've been working on this project for almost 2 years now. Actually, before that, starting as a NASA research project and funded by some of Mark Moore's efforts there. We started looking at the whole issue of how we might be able to make electric VTOL aircraft work in an urban environment where we know that helicopters are typically not functional for a bunch of reasons. Their actual acoustic noise is a problem for a lot of people. A whole bunch of other issues that we call virtual noise tends to dominate the discussion. People report noise issues when the problem is not really acoustical noise, but it's part of our problem. So we have to address all of the aspects of community acceptance, community approval, and we end up with a bunch of components of what we call the social license equation. People will accept a compromise in convenience, particularly if there's a good trade-off for benefits that they perceive. It can't be our decision, it has to be theirs. But we do realize that when we're addressing this problem, there are really two components that we have to take apart and understand what we can do to make things better. One is the design of the aircraft, where we're almost entirely concerned, in this part of the work anyway, with the acoustic component. The other is the design of the operation in the cities. What can we do about the aircraft operation, vertiport siting, vertiport design, route planning, and where we actually operate the aircraft based on what is the minimum impact to the community. So our tool set in both cases is about predicting this acoustic impact. It's quite a bit different from the traditional noise metrics that are used for aircraft, and we'll get into a little bit of detail of why that is. Our whole effort is about minimizing that. So we want to know why the noise of an unmanned or an urban air mobility vehicle might be different from a conventional aircraft. The aircraft is not there not there. It's in a conventional aircraft. We're talking about a study of a distant airport that has a more or less continuous noise source. Now we have it inside the community. The sound is completely different. It's not a broadband sound, but a bunch of tonal sounds. The distance is much, much closer. So we've decided to develop an entirely different set of metrics for this purpose. We're looking at, and this affects the whole equity issue, how many people are going to be affected by a given flight, by a given takeoff and landing, by a given flight, and use that as our metric rather than some arbitrary integrated metric that has evolved for other reasons. We want to design the vehicles and the operations so that nobody notices the sound. One of the tools that we're using for that is auralization of a community noise. We're going to hear a sample here. We're actually in a suburban street in Santa Cruz, California, actually. There's cars going by. There's actually a little Cessna aircraft about a mile away for your acoustic scaling purposes. Now in the next block, this is all scaled to actual sound level. This is a Robinson R-22 helicopter, conventional helicopter, taking off, and it's pretty intrusive. But this is our reference. This is what people know. It's intrusive because we hear these three components. We hear the tail rotor, the engine, and the main rotor. The brain processes that as three different sounds. And that's a problem because it becomes much more audible, much more detectable than if it were a constant sound. One of the main issues why helicopters are judged often to be noisier than their measurement would indicate. A lot of progress is being made in aircraft design. We have some light VTOL aircraft. What you're hearing is an actual recording of a volocopter played back at the exact same gain setting. It's at the same distance, about 250 feet away from where we are. So that was a recording with a little bit more wind noise than I would like, made almost 2 years ago. This difference between the helicopter sound and the eVTOL sound gave me some hope that we're close. We can do something about it now. And that difference is what we established as our reference goal for the improvement that we could make over a light helicopter. The elements of our prediction of these sounds in our vehicle design are based on these 4 components that I've made here. First, we're looking at the source model, the physical modeling of the aircraft noise itself. The propagation model is fairly well understood. That's how the sound is attenuated by the atmosphere. The 2 most important aspects that we're dealing with at this point are the receptor model, that is how the brain processes the sound to an understanding before you actually understand what that vehicle is. It's just exactly how the physiology works to determine what the loudness is. Joseph Schlittenlocher will be talking about that in great detail at the end. And then finally, the response model, which is what people psychologically respond to. We have to analyze each of these issues separately and try and figure out how they come up in an integrated concept of how the community will accept aircraft as they develop. I won't spend an awful lot of time on the physics of the source models. This is a very strongly developing effort. You'll have heard work that Rob's team, the vehicle team, is doing on this, and a lot of it depends on development of tools that haven't been used before because we haven't been building this kind of aircraft before. The receptor models are perhaps the most important. Rather than an integrated noise exposure or dose, we're actually looking at the physiological portion of human response, how the ear works, how the brain works in processing those neural impulses. And we find that the work that has been done for audibility of sounds in a background that have been done for other industries, such as broadcasting and telephones, when people want to know how objectionable a noise is when you're talking on the telephone, is actually much more applicable to our use case than some of the metrics that have been used before. So you'll be hearing a lot more about that process. The response models are about the subjective portion of this whole issue, and that's a whole team effort. Besides the elements that we control, such as the loudness of the sound, the duration, the time of day, the onset rate of each of these sounds, and the integration of the sounds that someone has heard over the day, we have their history. We have people's memory of what that sound means, and that's important. There's the visual correlates of, do people see something and assume a sound? In many cases, we get noise complaints for helicopters that have been seen but can't have been heard. And when you ask people, no, I didn't really hear it, but I see it out there, or I know it's there and I know it's noisy. So that's a separate problem. It's definitely part of the project, but we have to deal with it. The acoustic part is what we can work on. We need to quantify the virtual components of the noise experience, but for the vehicle design and the route design, we're working on the acoustic part. We have existing noise metrics that are used in airport planning, have been for decades. They're an exposure dose weighted metric. We'll be complying with those requirements. We'll be using those to show that we're meeting the existing requirements for existing airports, but we don't think that either the day-night level or the single event noise exposure level, which is recommended by some other government agencies, we don't think that either of those is actually applicable to our case. They're applicable, they're just not good enough, so we're pushing the edge. We have a new noise metric, as I mentioned, that is based on loudness over the ambient soundscape, which requires a lot of analysis of the existing soundscape. The duration, the number of events, then comes to the predictability of the likelihood that someone will be able to hear it. We have some more sounds for you. This is the volocopter that you heard, but now it's up close. We're about 150 feet away from it. This is what it sounds like when it takes off. This is actual sound level if you were about 150 feet, 200 feet away from a volocopter taking off and climbing up vertically. We think that that's probably a little more acceptable. Particularly, this is a very early test flight, and it was just a vertical climb out. We have some slightly altered recordings of a prototype electric VTOL that has not been shown publicly. So I can't tell you anything more about it, except that it's in the range of where we expect we'll be with the ECRM type vehicles. This is a fixed wing. There we go. That has lift fans. The lift fans are coming up now. This is again actual sound about 150, 200 feet away. It will be crossing over our heads. There's the forward thrust fan, and it's gone. This is a little louder than it ought to be, but it's an early prototype. What's much more interesting is what it sounds like when it's landing. This is that same aircraft. It's coming in from over there. It's going to cross overhead about 150 feet in front of us and about 100 feet in elevation. So we're not so concerned about the en route noise at this point. That's about what it will sound like. We have a slogan here about measuring what we want to improve. We don't want to measure the noise according to a traditional metric that may or may not really improve what it is that we want to predict, which is whether it's acceptable in the community, and we think that that's close to where we're going with that. One of the tools that we're using for and analyzing all of this is the Rotorcraft noise model, which has become the advanced acoustics model. Juliet Page from the Department of Transportation Volpe Lab is going to tell us a little bit about those tool set. And Uber is funding quite a bit of work with Juliet and Volpe to adapt some of these new metrics that we've been talking about to the existing tool set, and we're really excited to be able to partner with all of the expertise that has been built into that. Thanks, Juliet.
Thank you. So how cool was that, listening to those sounds? Starting to become real here. Okay, I'm with the Volpe Transportation Systems Center. We are a research lab, part of the DOT. Get to work on the cool, fun, cutting-edge, unique, multimodal transportation stuff. So we're very happy to be involved in this project. I'm going to talk a little bit about acoustic modeling of eVTOL, something about the source characteristics, a little bit of metrics, I'll show you a neat acoustic animation of a single notional operation for a helicopter, a conventional helicopter, and notional eVTOL. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the background and how we're leveraging a lot of the work that's been done for the National Park Service. So we're coming at this from a foundation of science that's established, and we know where we need to go, and we've defined a path to get there. There's still a lot of research and technical holes to be filled in, but we have a pretty high confidence we can get there. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the future modeling plans and the current work that's going on that Dave alluded to. I do have a bit of a disclaimer out there. The DOT does not officially endorse this project. We are involved in the research to be able to learn about this exciting new potential future urban transportation mode. Okay, so as Dave mentioned earlier, the key here is acceptability. If you think about the long history of noise and community noise and the metrics that are in use, a lot of those were developed decades ago to minimize the percent highly annoyed and determine what the dosages could be to reduce the percent highly annoyed. We want to get away from that construct. We want to get down and define what is acceptable. What will the communities be willing to accept for the trade of achieving the benefit of this new transportation mode? So we're on the opposite end of the spectrum from annoyance, and that brings in a whole new host of metrics. Things we'll be talking about are audibility and detection as opposed to annoyance. Obviously, we're going to have to conform to all the current regulations and guidelines that are out there, and that's not a problem. Although when they talk about 1,000 ops an hour, I start to think, oh my God. But we need modular tool sets to be able to kind of string this whole analysis together. One of the questions is, where should these fly? When should they fly? How frequent? What kind of noise are we going to be spreading around the community? How can you optimize and design around that to make this project a success? So as I talked about audibility, we're using like the loudness as a, there's lots of methods for quantifying loudness, and we're not using loudness, we're using audibility and bridging more towards the detection end of the range. Human hearing is able to discriminate noise actually below a background. If you have a tone, you can hear it, even if the numerical decibel level is below a background. It depends on the sound character, the quality, and all sorts of things. And after me, Joseph will be talking a lot more about the human perception. So one of the things that's important to bring into this is the uniqueness of each of these vehicles. They all sound quite different. You heard several different notional sounds today, and I'm sure all of the designers out there are coming up with even more creative vehicle designs that are all going to have their unique sounds. And the question is, can we develop tools and methods to kind of capture the uniqueness of these vehicles under their different operating modes, whether they're taking off, flying en route, or coming in for a landing? So that's part of the challenge here. So last year, the guidelines we were given were building upon last year's Uber Summit, so don't repeat last year. So I have one slide in here for those of you that may not have seen last year's briefing. I talked a little more about the advanced acoustic model. It's a propagation model, and it's a modular tool set. Graphically, I'm showing that just a notional multi-segment approach. And the point here is that the vehicle, as it's flying along, as a function of its operating state, its speed, its flight path angle, what its rotor system configuration is it in lift mode, transition, forward flight mode, or what have you, it's emitting different sound characteristics in all different directions. So you can kind of picture a noise sphere around the vehicle, and it's emitting noise in all those different directions. And that noise has spectral information, tonal information, time-varying information. So what you do is in the advanced acoustic model, you can simulate a trajectory, and at each point along the trajectory, you have this tonal noise emission, and it propagates it through the atmosphere, taking into account environmental things like temperature, winds, humidity, and so forth. And then you accumulate that sound in a time-based manner at a receiver, or a grid of receivers at a critical receptor. And from there, you can then use your receptor module that Dave mentioned to compute any one of a variety of metrics. And the jury's still out what's the appropriate metric to use for this class of vehicles. But it's a modular tool to be able to do that. Here I'm just showing a couple of the information about a simulation I'm going to be showing. Last year, I showed some information using a notional NASA eVTOL design. They gave us a little bit of data a year ago, so this is that old data, that NASA notional eVTOL. I just have a single spectrum, so I'm assuming it's an omnidirectional source, which is not real, but it's the only assumption we can make at this point. Hopefully, ultimately, the designers in the room will be hooked up with computational aeroacoustics codes and can actually predict what the noise emission are for their vehicles, or when they have them built in their flight testing, you can actually empirically gather the source characteristics. So what I'm also going to show here is a Bell 206, a conventional small helicopter, and that includes all of the complexity of a real helicopter as a function of its operating state. The plot on the top right here is for some recent flight test data for a joint FAA-NASA test that was conducted last year. It's for a Bell 407. But what it's showing to you is the complexity of the noise emission as a function of the operating state. And this is just showing flight path angle and speed. And red is higher noise level, and yellow is lower noise level. So it kind of suggests to you that there's, for a conventional helicopter, there's a way to get from high speed, high altitude to low speed, low altitude for your approach. And there's probably an optimal way that you can fly and get from there down to your vertiport or your skyport. And so the designers in the room need to be thinking about this. How are you going to optimize your transition schedule from horizontal to vertical mode, and stuff like that. So this is a tool that we hope to eventually get into the hands of the designers, that they can be taking these things into account. Okay. One of the other points that was made, and this is different from last year's, we're now going to try to take into account the background and compute audibility. So audibility, whether you can hear something or not, is clearly dependent on what type of environment you're in. If you're in the peak rush hour traffic, 6 to 9 in the morning, a lot more activity going on, higher background levels, it's going to be much more difficult to hear a vehicle than if it's at 10 o'clock at night and things are quiet and settle down. So the metrics that we're looking at need to take into account background data. And for the purposes of this, I've just transformed some BTS data that we have. I won't get into the details of it, but I will show you, this is just a precursor of the video I'm going to show you in a minute. I want to set the stage and then we'll go into it. On the top row, the top two ones are the conventional helicopter. The bottom two are this notional eVTOL. The left is a background with the morning rush. So it's noisier, there's more noise all around. The right is the notional quiet nighttime. And on the next slide, you're going to see an animation of a vehicle taking off in the north and heading southwards. All right, so you can see where they're taking off. What I'm plotting here is the audibility. And so against the background, the higher background, on the left two plots, you're not hardly even seeing the vehicle. So it's basically disappearing, both the helicopter and the eVTOL, except for that little blip in the beginning. You're basically not able to pick it up against this assumed background that I've got here. On the right side, in the quiet night, you can see more of the vehicle impacting the community. So this is just looking at audibility here. Now, I've made a fair number of assumptions to go into this, and the point of this was to illustrate the tools and the types of thinking that we need to bring into this process. I mentioned earlier we're leveraging a lot of the research foundation that is already out there. Volpe has been involved with the national parks and developing tools for prediction of audibility and understanding community response. If you think about it, in the national parks, they're trying to preserve the natural quiet. And they want to reduce they want to improve the experience of the visitors in the park And there are federal mandates that they are not allowed to hear overhead traffic or air tour traffic or transportation traffic for a certain percentage of the time in certain parks. And there's been a vast body of science and research that's gone into this, and a development of tools and methodologies for prediction of audibility. And we're leveraging this. We're bringing it into an urban constraint or an urban construct as opposed to a very quiet national park, but a lot of the methodologies, tools, and metrics still apply. So here I'm referring to, I mentioned some of the official policies that come from federal mandates, where the primary measure that they're using there is percentage of the time the aircraft are audible. And the Grand Canyon National Park's policy states that a substantial restoration requires that 50% or more of the park achieve a natural quiet. And there's a lot of research and science that defines what exactly is a natural quiet in a natural park. So these are established procedures and methodologies that are out there in the federal domain that this Uber kind of a construct can leverage moving forward. The strengths of it is it's easy to measure, it's easy to understand, and really key is it's very easy to understand by the public. It's easy to explain to the public. They understand it. They get time audible. How long will I hear it? How often will I hear it? That's a very easy thing to explain as opposed to a decibel and log base 10 and all of the other stuff. If any of you have been in public meetings and tried to explain that, you know it's a challenge. Okay, so one last point I want to make is one of the other things that's been brought into the noise management in the national parks is this concept of management by zones. And they've defined particular zones in the parks that have different sets of criteria and limitations in terms of the noise and audibility. That is something that we might want to think about as being relevant to the Uber Air concept, where there could be in a particular community critical areas which are more noise sensitive or less noise sensitive. Perhaps industrial areas can withstand more noise exposure than residential areas. And so this concept by zones is an important thing to bring into mind, and we're investigating and exploring how these types of techniques can be brought into the Uber thing. One last point, Dave mentioned the research that's going on to improve the advanced acoustic modeling. Some of the details of what we're going to be doing over the next year: we're going to be expanding the acoustic modeling to go to 1/12 octave bands, higher time sampling rate. We're going to be integrating the time varying loudness metrics into the tool. And the idea here is to be able to use this type of a tool within the design process. Okay, I think I'm just about running out of time here. So the takeaway from my briefing is we need to take a holistic approach to looking at this. Everything from the source, its operational construct, the propagation, down to the receptor. Once you get to the receptor, we need to think about what the human response is to audibility, to these signals, the sound character and quality of the signals. And next, I will bring Dr. Joseph Schlittenlocher from the University of Cambridge onto the stage, and he will discuss that in more detail. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. So I titled my talk, "The Ear as a Sound Receiver." So you might ask, why? Is there any other sound receiver? Yes, there is, microphones. And all the regulations do so as if the microphone is the only sound receiver. But in the human ear, there's lots of signal processing going on beyond our microphone, which is the membrane of the eardrum. Beyond the eardrum, there are the ossicles, and then there is our basilar membrane. On the basilar membrane, sound is still like a wave, and that is transformed into neural spikes. The basilar membrane acts like a frequency analyzer. It's a pretty advanced device that we have built in there. Its frequency scale is not linear, not logarithmic. It's a different scale, and depending on where the membrane is excited, those hair cells cause the neurons to fire, and transmit the signal to the auditory cortex, where we perceive loudness. When we model the human brain, we don't go beyond the auditory cortex, so we don't model feelings or emotions or any memory effects that you have, nothing that's individual. Everything that you see on that slide is very similar in all of us. Why do we want to use loudness and not A-weighted sound pressure level like all those regulations? Well, because loudness models, like levels, are an objective measure. It's something that I can calculate. It simulates the average human listener. Unlike A-weighted levels, loudness consider many things of our perception. For example, the frequency rating of A levels is actually should be level dependent. And funnily, A weighting is based on a soft equal loudness contour, but when we judge environmental noise, it's not soft, it's usually higher. So we should use not A weighting, but B, C, or D weighting. Loudness also considers spectral loudness summation. I've talked about that in detail last year. So let me just present some sounds. All of them have the same level. So the broader the bandwidth, it's getting louder, but they had all the same level. Another important aspect of loudness is the temporal shape of a sound. You will listen to 3 sounds. All of them have not just the same level, but the same long-term spectrum, but they don't sound the same. So the last one sounded a little like a helicopter. And one final thing that's very important for us, we don't operate our VTOLs in test facilities. We operate them in an urban environment. We want them to merge into that environment. So what we're actually interested in is the partial loudness of a VTOL. Let me talk a little more about the time varying aspect, because that's very important. We distinguish several stages of loudness through our, when it passes through the brain. First of all, there is nothing happening instantaneously in this world. When I talk about instantaneous loudness, I talk about a resolution of about 1 millisecond. These fast changes in loudness are not available to our conscious perception. However, we've proven that they exist with brain imaging studies. The most important for us is short-term loudness. It takes into account that neurons don't fire immediately. We model it with time constants in the order of 10 to 50 milliseconds. And here you see the short-term loudness of a helicopter, which is above the short-term loudness of noise with the same long-term spectrum that is constant. And short-term loudness is the most important to consider when we operate in a background noise. Another concept would be long-term loudness. For example, when I talk, the vowels are louder than the fricatives, but you would say, well, I talk with that and that loudness, so it's a little longer time frame to judge. What's often handy is one single value for a very long duration. Averaging across many hours can be handy, but it often doesn't tell us very much, or we have to be careful with interpreting the meaning. For example, the average temperature in Los Angeles is 64 Fahrenheit, but, well, it's kind of hotter now. Sometimes when we average along long terms and have only one single value, it's like putting your 9-course dinner in a mixer and get one value that represents nothing. I want to demonstrate that mathematically. Assume we have 5 minutes that we measure. 10%, so half a minute, is 70 decibels. It's a truck that passes. And 4.5 minutes have 50 dB. So what is the average levels in these 5 minutes? First of all, we convert the levels to intensities. 70 dB is 100 milliwatt per square centimeter, and 50 dB is 1 milliwatt per square centimeter. We take those 100 milliwatt times 10% and add 1 milliwatt times 90%, and that is 10.9 milliwatt, which is about 60 decibels. So what is the meaning of these 60 decibels? If we design a VTOL that is accepted in a background noise of 60 decibels, well, it's not accepted in 90% of the time. On the other hand, if we use these 60 decibels to characterize the truck, well, if you wake up at a level of 70 decibels, but not at 60 decibels, you will wake up. So averaging along long times is not always the best idea. Background noise is important, as I've said. We operate VTOLs in urban environments, so we can kind of make use of that background noise to hide the sound of our VTOL. I have created 2 examples, not of actual vehicles, just for a demonstration. Assume we've put a lot of money and time effort in designing 2 sounds that are 14 decibels below our urban background noise. Vehicle A is just a constant noise. It sounds like that. And vehicle B is a simulated helicopter. It has the same long-term spectrum. I just applied a windowing function so that it has these pulses. So, a little different. We operated in a, let's assume, in a much higher background noise, 14 decibels higher in level. So how does our vehicle A sound in background noise? It's 14 dB lower. So you would say you've just heard the same background noise again. The vehicle is inaudible. Now listen carefully to vehicle B. So if you listen carefully, you could hear the pulses. And the same applies to a real helicopter that has 14 dB less than a background noise. So in the middle part, if you listen very carefully, despite 14 decibels less, you still can hear the helicopter, but not the constant noise. So when you design such a sound, you have to be careful what these changes in loudness over time cause. These are pretty short changes. The time scale is 1 pulse every 50 milliseconds, but it has some effect on audibility. That's why we analyze sounds by looking at so-called loudness spectrograms. On the y-axis on the top, we have a frequency scale, the scale of our basilar membrane, on the x-axis time. And here you see a traffic noise spectrum at night. It's pretty constant across time, and most of its energy is below 1 kilohertz. It has a loudness level of 60 phone, which is for this sound about 45 to 50 dBA. Let's look to the morning. You see 7 sound events. Apart from that, you see it has gotten louder, the background noise. Now it's most dominant at 1 kilohertz. And these 7 sound events have a really bad sound design because they don't even try to hide in the spectrum of the background noise. But the guy who designed this did so by intention. It's a rooster. So when we design a vehicle, we just want to be the opposite. We don't want to use frequencies that are outside of our background noise. We want to hide kind of in the background noise. Here you see a motorbike, midnight. And you can see very well when the guy switches gears, the first gear, the second gear, and then a long time the third gear, and it gets really loud and annoying. So if you want to optimize the sound in an autonomous vehicle, you could use these figures and use them to say, well, I don't stay in the third gear that long to optimize my sound. Here is an airplane flying just above us. That's a brute force of how to be louder than our background noise. One interesting thing that you can see, you can hear the low frequency for a longer time than the high frequencies. That's because of the attenuation in air and partly of the directional characteristics of that jet. One more example, here is a somewhat distant helicopter, tries to hide at the frequencies around 500 hertz to 1 kilohertz, but it's a little louder, and it's not constant, so not ideal to hide an urban traffic noise. All these examples that we've seen is nothing that we want to use as a reference. In the white paper, Uber stated that a VTOL should be half as loud as a medium-sized truck. Let's look at trucks. Here we have large trucks on a very busy highway, and what's characteristic for all of them, there is a component around like 200 to 300 hertz that's always clearly audible. Here an example for a small truck. And this small truck has the same characteristic. If we want to analyze the frequencies in more detail, we could take one moment of time and compare it to another moment of time where only the background noise is audible and compare it as a function of frequency. In this slide here, you see the loudness that is produced at certain frequencies at a function of frequencies on the scale of the basilar membrane. The blue curve is the truck together with road traffic noise, and the red curve is the partial loudness of the truck. So you see at which frequencies is your truck audible. So this truck is already inaudible around like 500 hertz. So if you improve your truck around 500 hertz, well, it would still be as loud. If you want to improve your truck, that image shows us, well, we should improve around like 350 hertz where we have a peak, or again at like 1 kilohertz. If we reduce the level there, then we get it much softer in urban background noise. With our VTOLs, we have more options. We could simply fly higher. That reduces our high frequency content at the receiver position, but of course there are regulations, and there are not that many degrees of freedom that you can just fly higher. Loudness is a pretty complex model, so we have to consider how often has it to be calculated for one receiver. As far as I understand Uber, we are not just interested in calculating it for one microphone. We are interested in predicting the 12 million receivers that live in the LA area. So for one calculation, we should not spend too much time. So we can apply some signal theories, how often we have to calculate that specific example. Here is a helicopter. It has one pulse every 17 milliseconds. And if we are smart, then we could say, well, we have to calculate it twice as often as these 17 milliseconds at a rate of 35 hertz, so each 29 milliseconds. Another issue is privacy when we record our noises. Here you see the spectrum of the instantaneous loudness of a road traffic noise. You don't see much because there are only slow changes, so let's zoom in to the low frequencies. Here, frequencies means how often short-term loudness changes. So 1 hertz means, well, there is not too much change faster than each second. That's sensible because when a vehicle passes by, it needs some 5 seconds, which corresponds to a frequency of 0.2 hertz. So for road traffic noise, we don't need to calculate loudness that often. We don't have to record it that often, which is pretty good, because when we place our microphone in the city, we might accidentally record speech and violate your privacy. So if we just record your, or if we average across like several seconds, then you can't extract speech. We did some analyses. How well do we do if we average across longer times? If we average across 2 minutes, then we make an error of 5 phone on average, which is pretty high. So we use better resolutions. Here you see a resolution of 1 spectrum and 1 loudness value each 10 seconds. You can already see a little. It gets better at 5 seconds, and our average error gets below 2 phone. Of course, it gets better when you increase the resolution, and the error that you make here is basically these very short-term effects of short-term loudness in the millisecond range. but we can deal with them statistically. So if we measure road traffic noise or average across a few seconds, then we can still use that background noise for our predictions. So what predictions can we already make? Well, we can already use it to calculate the partial loudness of a VTOL or of what you expect from the sound of your VTOL in urban background noise. We can use that now to optimize those VTOLs to make them quieter in our cities. If we are not a manufacturer, but the operator or buyer, well, if you have a choice between two vehicles, you can just use that has a lower partial loudness. Or you can compare your vehicle to a motorbike, truck, or whatever you want to compare it to see how do we merge into that urban soundscape. Do we make the sound of a city worse, or is it still acceptable? And what's really great is using loudness, we can predict how many people can hear a VTOL. And I think that's a much better number than just saying that sound has 75 dB. If we say, well, on this route with that vehicle, 8,000 people can hear this VTOL. If you use another VTOL, 12,000 people can hear it. So you have a clear measure of your acoustic cost, telling you how many people can hear it or how many people hear it at a loudness that is still accepted. So thank you very much for your attention. All three of us, David, Juliette, and me, we will be in the Unmanned forum and have a small room there where you can listen to David's sounds and a few more. If you have any questions, we will be there in the afternoon and during lunchtime. Thanks.
Please join us for lunch in the Tabor Courtyard. We'll also be hosting Lunch and Learn in the Haas Center. Students from the Arts Center College of Design and the Savannah College of Art and Design will be showing off their vision for the future Uber Air experience.